Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to a special edition of the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at The Bills Guys. And I was inspired to make this podcast today because after the show last week, I was really analyzing the schedule and I came up with a framework to sort of categorize our 2023 opponents. I know last week we told you we were going on vacation for 2 weeks. We were taking 2 weeks off, but I really got the gears in the mind started going and shifting and turning. And I really want to sort of take about 20 or 30 minutes today to do a short pre-recorded show here and walk you through the framework of our 2023 opponents. And the framework is as follows. And I categorized each of our 2023 opponents into tiers based on their perceived level of difficulty. And those tiers ended up being 3 tiers. There was tier number 1, which was 50-50 games. These are games that us as Bills fans, we're going to be sort of uneasy going into these games. We're going to have that uneasy feeling. We're not going to feel so great. It's going to be like a 50-50 sort of toss-up type of game. Teams that are as good as or within the margin of error of the Buffalo Bills. The second tier of opponents, the second category is 60-40 games. These are games that as Bills fans, we are confident going into these games. We know that on paper we are better than the opponent that we're facing, but this other team has talent too. Talent enough to beat us if we don't come and play our best game and we slip up. So that's tier number 2. And then tier number 3 is sort of those 70-30 games. These teams have talent, but there are enough question marks to where the Bills are clearly, by a wide margin, the better team, and then they can't afford to lose those games. So when all is said and done, 9 games wound up in this 50-50 tier that I'm going to get to in a moment. 4 games ended up in the 60-40 tier and 3 games in the 70-30 tier. So let's break it all down. And you can see the tiers here to the right of me. Tier number 1, let's start with that, sort of the 50-50 games. And the Buffalo Bills have an absolute gauntlet of a schedule in 2023. I came up with, as I said, 9 50-50 games that I think the Buffalo Bills are going to be playing in this year. The teams in tier 1 include Kansas City, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Miami twice, the Jets twice, the Chargers, and Dallas. So let's start with the first 3 teams in tier 1 of these 50-50 games: Kansas City, Cincinnati, and Philadelphia. The first 2 teams, Kansas City and Cincinnati, these are 50-50 games. These are the 2 teams that have eliminated us from the playoffs the past 3 years. These are the 2 teams that stand in our way of getting to and making the Super Bowl, which is obviously, I think, every Bills fan's number 1 goal. For Kansas City, let's take a look at this team and why it's a 50-50 game. Their focus this offseason seemed to be mostly on development. They won the Super Bowl last year with all those young players, and the thought is this season, those young players are going to get even better. On offense, guys like Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Isaiah Pacheco are going to be counted on. On defense, they're looking for improvement from Trent McDuffie, Brian Cook, Jalen Watson, and George Karlaftis. They made a couple of changes on offense and defense. On offense, Donovan Smith in at left tackle, Jawan Taylor at right tackle. The biggest change to the defense, Onmenhu was brought in. That was their big money, big ticket free agent signing this year to go along with first round pick Uzama to sort of bolster that pass rush there in Kansas City. So that's a team that got better, or at least stayed the same from their Super Bowl caliber team that they had. And then you look at Cincinnati. They mostly held steady as well. They made that Orlando Brown splash to bolster their offensive line. They sort of took a risk on Irv Smith Jr. at tight end. They didn't really fill the hole at tight end other than with Irv Smith Jr., so that's kind of a risk for them. And on defense, again, they're mostly running it back with a cohesive coaching staff of Brian Callahan and Lou Anarumo. They lost Bell and Bates, which are huge for them, but they replaced them with Dax Hill, last year's first-round pick, and Nick Scott. Plus, they add Miles Murphy to that edge rotation. So again, 2 teams that are in the same tier as the Buffalo Bills that didn't exactly make any major moves. However, the one thing I find funny and ironic is no one's accusing these teams of not getting better, like a lot of people in the national media, a lot of pundits have to say about the Buffalo Bills this offseason. So I find that kind of funny. So these are two teams in Kansas City and Cincinnati where when the Buffalo Bills go to play them, we're going to have this real uneasy feeling in our stomach. This is a tier one. These are 50-50 games. Anytime you have Josh Allen, in my opinion, the worst you can be is 50-50, barring like a massive amount of injuries or things of that nature. But I posted these tiers on social media and I asked for people's commentary, and I'm going to read some of those tweets, or I'm going to summarize some of those tweets. Buffalo Freddy came in and he tweeted about these matchups with Kansas City and with Cincinnati. He said, listen, I'm sorry, but these are 40-60 games that the Buffalo Bills are actually the worst team, or a worse team than Kansas City and Cincinnati. Maybe he's right? Like maybe he is right. But again, as long as we have Josh Allen, to me, no game this season is going to be worse than a toss-up, a 50-50 game. Another team that people were sort of throwing into that 40-60 tier in the comment section on Twitter when I posted these tiers on social media was the Philadelphia Eagles, right? That is a team that, listen, there are some flaws from this team that came back from the Super Bowl last year. Randy Hardman pointed out they lost both their coordinators, which is not a joke, not something to play around with. They have two new coordinators heading into 2023, but they have practically the same offense, but they've added DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, who when healthy is dangerous. They added Zacchaeus, so a slot receiver to go with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith there. They did lose their right guard, but they either have Tyler Steen or Cam Jurgens to fill in there. So again, outside of running back, mostly just running back that offense that was wildly successful in 2022. Their defense is a little bit in flux. New defensive coordinator in Sean Desai, but they've added Jalen Carter to that interior defensive line rotation after losing veterans like Ndamukong Suh. All their linebackers are gone, but now Nakobe Dean, last year's third-round pick, probably should have been a first or a second-round pick. If not for that knee issue, he now steps in, along with Nicholas Morrow, who has familiarity with Desai from their time in Chicago. Their safeties are gone, but they've got Reed Blankenship, who played well in spots last year, stepping in. They got Terrell Edmonds, who they signed, plus they drafted Sidney Brown rather early in the draft. And then they have all those Georgia dudes. I mentioned Jalen Carter already. They added Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo, and they have Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean heading into year number 2. So a lot of question marks in Philadelphia, but that's a solid assortment of talent on defense. And that is my top 3 in tier 1. I don't think many people would argue with the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Eagles placement on this tier list as 50-50 games, especially considering a large number of people wanted to place them as 40-60 games. And again, I'm not willing to go that far, but some people were. Then to continue to fill out tier number 1, these 50-50 games, there's 2 AFC East foes in the Jets and the Dolphins. Miami is scary, folks, right? Mike McDaniel calling that offense with all those weapons, guys like Waddle, guys like Tyreek Hill. They added some more speed in Devon Achane. They've added Braxton Berrios. That is an offense with a lot of skill and a very creative offensive play caller. Still, there's questions about their tight ends, their offensive line, and that defense is what is getting a lot of people on that Miami bandwagon. Adding Jalen Ramsey, adding David Long to all that talent they already have, plus the addition of Vic Fangio. So again, Miami is dangerous. Then you have the Jets. Aaron Rodgers, obviously, the big ticket trade they made this offseason. Breece Hall returns to go along with another young second-year stud in Garrett Wilson. They added Allen Lazard. They added Mecole Hardman. They improved their offensive line. Their offensive line got healthier. They were banged up a ton last year. And they pretty much returned the same dominant defense. I'm not ready to say either of these teams are better than the Bills. That needs to be proven on the field. But they got better. But again, so did the Buffalo Bills, which is like what the national media doesn't want to talk about this year. Because they didn't make that big splash. No one wants to say that the Bills actually got better. But these are legit toss-up games. If we go 2-2 with them, I, as a Bills fan, will not be remotely upset by that. You can still beat New England 2 times and go 4-2 in the AFC East. And if you can win 12, 13 games, go 4-2 in the AFC East, that you're going to continue to be AFC East champions. Joe Regan made a great comment on social media about my placement of the Dolphins and the Jets in tier 1. He said the Jets and the Dolphins home games should be 60-40 when we play the games in Orchard Park. That is a good point, right? Like if the Buffalo Bills are at home, if they're in Highmark Stadium, they maybe should have a little bit more of an advantage than when they're on the road. However, when I made this list, I didn't really take into account home and away. I didn't take into account short weeks or the place on the schedule or if the game's in London or not. It was simply just looking at these teams on paper and how they stacked up with the Buffalo Bills. The last two teams in my tier 1, in my 50-50 tier, these are the two teams that got the most pushback, and that was the Los Angeles Chargers and the Dallas Cowboys. In my opinion, when looking at these teams, both teams have franchise quarterbacks in Herbert and Dak Prescott. Staley and Dan Quinn are excellent defensive minds with insane amount of playmakers, especially pass rushers on those two defenses. Plus, they have all that skill position talent on offense. So to me, these are no-brainer 50-50 toss-up games. Maybe I should have created a 55-45 tier, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Like maybe that would have been a better place for teams like the Chargers and the Cowboys, but these are good football teams. And like I said, the Buffalo Bills have a gauntlet of a schedule. So the way I created these tiers, 50-50, 60-40, I'm not willing to say the Bills are 60-40 against a team like the Chargers or 60-40 against a team like Dallas. Again, this is on paper, not talking about the place on the schedule, where we're playing them. You have no idea what injuries are going to have occurred by then, what's going on. So all these things can change by game day, obviously. But on paper, these two teams stack up with the Buffalo Bills. That leads me to tier 2. These are the 60-40 games where the Buffalo Bills really should win these games because they're a better football team than the opponent on paper, but the opponents are still pretty darn good football teams. And the most comments I got far and away on social media when I made this tiered list and I posted this tiered list, and I was actually genuinely surprised by this. Jaguars should be a 50-50 game. I had at least a dozen people comment that the Jaguars should be a 50-50 game. I get it, right? Offensive coach and Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, a lot of playmakers on offense, young pass rushers on defense, and Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. They have a rather fast defense, some good sideline to sideline linebackers, some talent in that secondary. But the number one reason people gave was the location. It was the London game, and anything can happen in London, people said. Remember, that's really not part of the formula or the equation. I was just going on what the teams look like on paper. And on paper, this team is good, but they're nowhere close, in my opinion, to the Buffalo Bills. They have some serious offensive line questions with Anton Harrison having to step in at left tackle. Their defense is good, but there's still some patches where the talent is questionable, especially the depth of the talent is questionable. Again, this is another one where maybe if there was a 55-45 tier, they're in it. But in this situation, there is not a 55-45 tier. Speaking of 55-45, and again, we're going to get to this because I actually created a second tier list based on your guys' feedback. And I actually created a 55-45 tier. We'll get to that in a moment. But Brian Daboll and the New York Football Giants, they overachieved in 2020 and they have a better roster in 2023. But again, it's not quite on par with the Buffalo Bills. Their offense has got Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, formulating and play calling and facilitating that offense. You have Daniel Jones facilitating to a number of playmakers, including Saquon Barkley, Darren Waller, Slayton, Hodgins, Campbell. They have Robinson, Wandale Robinson from last year's draft, and Jalen Hyatt from this year's draft. So plenty of skill position guys. They actually have a real center now in John Michael Schmitz to go with what around him is a pretty solid offensive line. The defense is stout up front with Williams and Lawrence. Plus, they got Kayvon Thibodeau. They got other young, exciting, and fast talent. And they're coached up by one of the best in the business, in Wink Martindale. So the Giants are very good. They're not a pushover. The Bills are better than them. On paper, they're better. But this is a football team that won a lot of games last year, and they're going to win a lot of games this year because they're well coached, and they've only gotten better. New England. This is one where people said, oh, they should be a 70-30 game. I think people are sleeping on New England a little bit. Very good defense. They've always had a very good defense. They're only going to continue to get better on defense. And now they got a semi-competent looking offense, right? Bill O'Brien is back. They added a bunch of special teams guys to sort of fix that unit. If they add DeAndre Hopkins, you have Devontae Parker at the X, DeAndre Hopkins at the Z, Juju Smith-Schuster from the slot, Hunter Henry, Mike Gesicki at tight end when they want to go 12. They got Tyquan Thornton to stretch the field. You got Ramondre Stevenson. Plenty of talent for Mac Jones, who's going to be reunited with Bill O'Brien. I think people sleep on Mac Jones. To me, I think he's about Kirk Cousins level good, or he could be. That's a ceiling, I think, is Kirk Cousins. And he's got the talent around him to be that good. The Bills are still far better football team, but the Patriots aren't a pushover. So I'm not willing to push them to 70-30. To me, that is a 60-40 game, whether we're home or away. The last team on my 60-40 list is actually a change I made from social media based on the backlash I got from people. I went back, I gave it a double check. I did some more analysis. And you know what? My initial analysis, I think, was wrong. And that team is the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton. I put them in my 60-40 list. I've moved them from my 70-30 list. Sean Payton is now there. He's a pretty decent offensive mind, if I don't say. You have Russell Wilson looking slimmed down. He's still a weirdo. You still don't know what you're going to get from him, but he looks like maybe he's taking it more seriously this season. And then they have playmakers at their skill position. Plus, they added McGlinchey and Ben Powers to their offensive line. They got a lot of names on that defense. A lot to prove, but on paper, that's a very, very solid football team. And again, I think I was wrong in my initial analysis there. And then finally, you have tier 3. And in tier 3, I placed the Washington Commanders, the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, they're all solid rosters with plenty of talent. You look at the Commanders team, plenty of talent. The Raiders team, there's a lot of stud players there. Same with Tampa Bay, but they all have some obvious holes. Not to mention, I don't think they have the most inspiring coaching staffs in the world. Ron Rivera, not exactly one of the top, 10, 15 coaches in the National Football League. He's proven to be a 500 or less than outside of like one real fluke season type of head coach in the National Football League. Josh McDaniels has really not looked great in his stints as a head coach in the National Football League. Everyone thought the Raiders were going to be way better last year than they were. And on paper, I think they've probably gotten worse as a football team. Then you have Todd Bowles, who, again, that Tampa Bay team was just a mess last year. They sort of scapegoated Byron Leftwich, but Todd Bowles is less than inspiring head coach. So despite all this, these teams are not number one overall pick bad. So there's 70-30 games, but you got to beat these dudes. These are the teams that there's no excuse outside of a Josh Allen injury, knock on wood, for the Buffalo Bills to lose to the Washington Commanders, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. I think if Sam Howell clicks, especially with Eric Bieniemy there, then maybe Washington gets moved up to the 60-40 tier, because that roster might be shallow, but there's some talented players, including McLaurin and Dotson and Gibson there at running back, Robinson there at running back, and then some really talented players on defense. It's a shallow roster. They're not very deep, but if Sam Howell clicks, maybe they move up to the 60-40 tier. All right, so let's now take a look at what all of these tiers mean in terms of helping sort of predict what the Buffalo Bills schedule would look like. You look at tier 1, these 50-50 games: Kansas City, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Miami twice, the Jets twice, the Chargers, and the Cowboys. Really, if you're the Buffalo Bills, realistically, I think you want to try to look to go 5-4 in those 9 football games. If the Buffalo Bills can get out of those 9 football games at 5-4, I will be extremely happy. Now, again, the caveat to that being injuries, weather, schedule. I'm not taking any of those things into account. These things could change the morning of the game, the week of the game. Oh, Dak Prescott's not playing. That now becomes a 70-30 game or an 80-20 game or a 90-10 game, right? That's a game you got to win. Oh, Justin Herbert's not playing. Okay, that's a game you got to win. You don't know what's going to happen. But looking at it on paper in June, you're like, yeah, the Buffalo Bills need to go 500 or better in those games. So 5-4 or better. Then you look at the 60-40 games. I'll give them one slip up, right? 4-1 in those games against the Jaguars, the Giants, the Patriots twice, and the Broncos. They get one slip up. People seem to really like the Jacksonville Jaguars in London. Maybe that's their slip up there, but then they got to win the other 4. And then they got to do their work in those 70-30 games against the Commanders, the Raiders, and the Buccaneers. They go 5-4 against the gauntlet teams that they have, those 9 teams in tier 1. They go 4-1 against the Jags, the Giants, the Patriots twice, and the Broncos. And then they go 3-0 in tier 3. That's 12-5. It's a 12-5 record. A lot of people pointing to the Bills and like, well, 13-4, 14-2. I'm seeing that all over social media. The Buffalo Bills, there's no margin for error for the Buffalo Bills this year, right? Like, little room for error. They need to eke out above a 500 in tier 1. You get one slip up in tier 2 and tier 3, because one slip up or multiple slip ups, 2 slip ups in tier 2 or tier 3, going under 500 in tier 1, going 4-5. Now you're talking about 11 wins, not 12, right? 11-6. That's wild card territory. Again, not the end of the world because we're a good football team. You could probably still do work out of that wild card spot in the playoffs, but I think that would definitely be below Bills fans' expectations. So let's take a look now at sort of my amended tiers. I amended the tiers based on the feedback I got from people on social media. And again, the same results. So what I did in these tiers was I now have 5 50-50 games. The Chiefs, the Bengals, the Eagles, and the Dolphins and Jets away games. I now added another tier, 55-45. And in those games, the Chargers, the Cowboys, the Jaguars, the Giants, and then our home games against the Dolphins and the Jets. Again, looking at these, that's a tough tier. Hoping to go maybe 2 games above 500 in that tier. The 60-40 games, I left the 2 games against the Patriots and the Broncos. And the 70-30 games, I left the Commanders, I left the Raiders, I left the Buccaneers. So looking at these tiers, again, trying to predict our record. Well, let's go 3-2 in those 50-50 games. Stay above 500. So you got to win 3 of Kansas City, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, away game, Miami, and the New York Jets. The 55-45 games, Chargers, Cowboys, Jaguars, Giants, Dolphins at home, Jets at home. You probably want to go 2 games above 500 there. You want to win 4 of the 6 games in that tier. Then you look at the 60-40 games. Again, give yourself 1 slip up because everyone has a slip up every year, right? The Patriots twice, the Broncos once. Preferably the slip up is to the Broncos, right? Because if you're splitting with the Dolphins, if you're splitting with the Jets, you're sitting at 2-2 in the AFC East. The last thing you want to do is go 3-3 because then maybe you're giving the Dolphins or the Jets a tiebreaker. So again, in this scenario, you really want to make sure it's the Patriots that you're beating twice. The Patriots games, I think, are going to be huge this year, especially if we split those Dolphins and Jets games. And then again, you got to do your work in the 70-30 games. You don't, you miss the playoffs or you're a wild card, that's on you for losing to the Commanders, the Raiders, or the Buccaneers. So no matter how you shake it, 12-5 seems like a realistic prediction based on the way I've created these tiers. And that leads me to another user comment. And it's one of my favorite comments. And it came from Bill's Reddit. He said, it's June. Things change. We all thought this last year and we won 13 games. First of all, kudos to Sean McDermott, because again, looking at that schedule in June, that was a difficult schedule. All the adversity the Buffalo Bills went through last year, give Sean McDermott credit. The Bills went 13-3. So what I did was I did a little thought exercise. And I took a look at what these tiers would have looked like in June of 2022 with last year's schedule. And in the 50-50 games, I put Kansas City, Cincinnati, the Rams, the Packers, and the Ravens. We went 4-0. Obviously, the Bengals game was not played in that stretch of what we all thought in June were 50-50 games. The Rams were not who we thought they were. The Packers were not who we thought they were. The Ravens, when they had Lamar, were exactly who we thought they were. So I feel comfortable with that, keeping them there in that tier 1. Last year in June, if we were looking at the 60-40 games, Miami twice, the Jets twice, the Patriots twice, the Vikings, the Titans. Dolphins were probably better than we thought they were last year. We split those. The Jets, their defense was really good. Their offense was meh. That's why we split with them. We handled the Patriots last year. Vikings better than we thought they were. Titans worse than we thought they were. That was our worst stretch. We lost all of our games in that tier 2, the 60-40 stretch. We went 5-3. And then we went 4-0 in those 70-30 games. The Steelers, the Lions, the Browns, and the Bears. That culminated in a record of 13-3. If you compare last year's schedule on paper to this year's schedule on paper, I don't know about you. Last year, I was scared about our schedule. Uneasy would be a better word. I was uneasy about our schedule last year. I'm straight like unnerved with our schedule this year because there is that gauntlet in tier 1 that I mentioned. And even if you want to split it to 55-45 and create that second tier, it still makes me very, very uneasy. There's little margin for error for the Buffalo Bills this season. So that brings us back to the question, the thumbnail of this show, right? Will the Bills disappoint in 2023? Well, I think that all depends on your expectations for the Buffalo Bills this season. If you're expecting 13, 14, 15 wins, I think you might be disappointed just the way that this schedule shakes out this year. This is a playoff team. They should make the playoffs. If they don't make the playoffs, you're darn right you should be disappointed. This is a team that should make the playoffs. Once they're there, they have the talent to win the whole dang thing, as Tom Berenger would say in more colorful language in the movie Major League. Once they're there, they have the talent to win the whole thing. Jordan Palmer made a great prediction on his podcast. He said he thinks the Buffalo Bills are going to win 11 games this year, which would be disappointing to most Bills fans. He has them not winning the AFC East this year. He has the Dolphins winning the AFC East. Again, would be massively disappointing for Bills fans. But then he has them winning the Super Bowl because that's possible too, right? The Buffalo Bills have been the 2, the 3, the 4 seed the last couple of years. How has that worked out for them? Not so great. Maybe we should try something different. Maybe a gauntlet of a schedule, getting in there as a 5 or a 6 seed could, to a degree, maybe help the Buffalo Bills out, put a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Listen, if you can ride the roller coaster this year, and with this schedule, it's going to be a doozy without puking, I think the Bills will live up to their talent and not disappoint you in the year 2023. The way it seems, 95% of the national media is predicting. They're all predicting that we're the Bills' downfall. The Bills are going to face plant. The Bills are going to disappoint. The Bills are going to miss the playoffs. The Bills are no longer kings of the AFC East. I don't think the Buffalo Bills will disappoint you, but it's not going to be a pleasant, smooth ride to get there, to get to where we want to get. So I hope you found this fun little exercise enjoyable and worth the pop-up podcast that I'm doing here. Hit up the comment section with your analysis of my commentary and share your own tiered lists. I will be in here all week in the comment section responding to it. And, you guys, once the video is over, replying in the comment section, it really helps boost our videos and boost our posts. So obviously it's greatly appreciated. We will officially be back on Monday, July 17th in our usual 9 p.m. slot with our annual training camp preview show. So thank you again for listening. And until next time, go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!